Hey guys, today I am reacting to why the US isn't ready for clean energy. So there'd be a variety of reasons, but the thing is, you need incremental change. It doesn't matter if the US is ready or not. We should go ahead with it anyway, and just slowly do it. Or even fast changes could also be welcome as well. But still, we should be moving forward with clean energy regardless, even if we're not ready for it. I think. And of course, more nuclear energy should be a priority as well, because nuclear energy is very, very useful. Yeah.
The state of Vermont has one of the greenest grids in the US. 2/3 of their electricity comes from renewable energy sources, like solar, wind, or hydroelectric plants. The current goal is to be at 75% by 2032, which is why it was pretty surprising when a new solar project here was denied. This area doesn't have a lot of people, but it does have plenty of potential for renewable energy. The power plants here, in addition to a regular power supply from Canada, already put about 450 megawatts of electricity onto the grid. And by grid, I mean these power lines.
I mean, honestly, a lot of these problems could just be solved by using more nuclear energy. We really should be using more nuclear energy. And researching more about fusion energy as well. Because nuclear fusion is, it's going to be the future apparently. But honestly, yeah, what we already have fission is super efficient and produces a lot of power. And we have so many safe designs for nuclear energy nowadays. Like, people who are for green energy and such, they should not be against nuclear power. It makes zero sense, honestly. Because for some reason, it seems like many conservative people are for nuclear energy. So people on the left should also be for nuclear energy. It should be more nonpartisan. It shouldn't be so political. We need nuclear energy. It's super efficient and further a lot of power, and it's super safe nowadays. There's a lot of areas in the U.S. where it would be more safe to build nuclear power plants as well. So it's definitely should be in operation.
But the grid's capacity is around 450 megawatts. So the grid just wouldn't be able to handle any more power generated here. If we want a greener future in the US, we'll need to build more renewable energy plants.
And more nuclear power plants.
To actually use that electricity, we'll also need to build more of these. This is a map of where everyone in the continental US lives, the density of each county. Here's New York City, LA, Chicago. And here's where every big power plant is currently. Appropriately, they tend to be where the people are. In Washington, D.C., where I live, we get nearly all our electricity from surrounding states' power plants, mostly nuclear and natural gas. Electricity goes from the power plant through big high-voltage transmission lines to a substation where the electricity is dispersed onto smaller, lower-power distribution lines that send it into my house. Like Vermont.
And if we had less single-family homes and more dense housing, it'd probably be even easier to spread all this energy, because if you have all these far distances, it makes it more complicated to send the energy across. So less suburbs, more cities, and more like row houses, townhouses. Just more dense housing in general.
Vermont, DC
would help a lot.
Also plans to be greener. The goal is to have 100% renewable sources making our electricity by 2032.
Damn, that's a long while away. DC should already be green.
It's part of a national goal, too. President Biden wants to reduce emissions in the U.S. 50% by 2030, with nearly half of U.S. power coming from solar plants by 2050.
That's good. Also, more nuclear in general, honestly.
That means switching out those natural gas plants for wind turbines, coal plants for solar farms. Lowering emissions also means switching from gas cars to electric cars.
It does, and I see people criticize electric cars for a lot of reasons. But the thing is, electric cars are definitely better than regular cars that are not electric. Like, pretty much no matter what. Of course, there is a flaw in just cars in general, though. Cars are just not as efficient as public transportation and walking and biking. Really, they're not. So public transportation should be what we're moving forward with, because public transportation is very easy to electrify. Yeah. But the thing with electric cars is they are definitely better than regular cars, because they don't produce smog and smoke. Like just when you have a bunch of electric cars in the city, right? Of course, you should not have cars in the city in the first place, but that's a different argument. But when you have a lot of cars in like a dense area, in like a city, right, and they're all electric, there's no smog. It doesn't pollute the city, which is a really good thing. But when you have a bunch of diesel or like gas cars in a city, they pollute the city and they make it just really annoying and loud. Because gas cars are even louder than electric cars too. So the problem is they just produce so much pollution. But whereas electric cars, they don't produce so much pollution from the car itself. Of course, they produce pollution, but that's at the factory, so it's all centralized. It's like one building where they make all the energy. So yeah, electric cars are a lot less polluting for the environment around you. And also at these factories where they produce the electricity, they're actually way better at containing the pollution because they have a lot of like filters and such where they filter all the smog and such. So yeah, electric cars are definitely better than gas cars. But in general, we should be moving towards more public transportation. And electric bikes and such. Pretty great.
Heating our buildings not with natural gas, but with electric heat pumps. Cooking on electric stoves. Basically,
electric stoves, but also induction stoves. They're awesome. We should use more induction.
we're going to be using a lot more electricity. Anywhere from 40 to 100% more than we currently use. So back to the map. If we're going to replace all these polluting energy plants, we can't just build a wind turbine in their place. They need to be where it's, windy.
Well, that's why we have nuclear power, because it doesn't really matter about the pre-existing conditions of the area. You can just build nuclear, like anywhere, pretty much. Of course, it would be probably better if it's away from natural disasters, which the US has a lot, but still, we could easily build them, and with the modern safety precautions we have, they would be quite safe. So we should build more nuclear power, because we don't have to worry about wind or sunlight.
This is a model created by Princeton, mapping out possible places in the continental US where wind and solar projects could, in theory, be built. Aside from some offshore wind farms, it's mostly in the middle of the US. Another study found that these states have most of the wind and solar potential, yet the people living there would only make up 30% of the electricity demand. In a decarbonized future, we're going to need to get electricity from here to here, and we're going to move a lot of it. That's where high voltage transmission lines come in.
I think the infrastructure is the most important thing. It doesn't get a lot of attention, but it really is the key.
This is where the US currently has high voltage transmission lines.
Infrastructure is important in general, yeah.
The Princeton model shows us this is where new lines will need to be built if the US uses all renewable energy by 2050. But it's not a simple process. Every wire in your house has plastic over it because if two electrical lines get too close. But high voltage power lines are the bare active wire, no plastic. They're insulated by the air. Basically, if they're kept far enough apart from each other, it's safe. But they also have to be kept far away from everything, trees included. This is actually how some of the California wildfires were started. Trees coming in contact with the super big high voltage transmission lines. And those are what we'll need more of as we lengthen the distance from.
Could we have some more underground ones instead, maybe? We should have more underground in general, yeah.
From energy source to energy need. We'll also need to make many current ones even bigger. Because bigger means more power. Physically, the cables are thicker. The bigger the cable, the more power can run through them. And because they're bigger, they have to be really far apart for insulation, and built higher up. It makes them kind of a pain to
Maybe we should insulate them more as well. Maybe not with plastic, but with some other material.
build, partly because of how large they are, but also how much private land they have to cross.
Very often the developer can get 99% of the landowners to agree, but then there's that last 1%, and that can take forever and can crater the whole thing.
So experts say we should start building now, even before we build the plants.
You can do a generation project in a year. The transmission 3, if you're lucky, but it can go over 10. We don't want to do this in a reactive mode where we build a lot of stranded generation. We want to proactively build the transmission to where we know the resources are. And the thing about wind and solar resources,
I mean, a lot of these issues would just be bypassed by just building more nuclear in the eastern and western parts of the U.S., to be honest. Which we should do anyway.
Which is, we know where they are.
A greener grid in the US means
Of course, the offshore wind farm along the northeastern area would not be, it's not a bad idea either.
thinking nationally, building more transmission lines so when it's sunny in Arizona, it can power Chicago. And at night, Illinois wind can power Phoenix.
Well, it's still a good idea regardless, but we should just in general build more nuclear in the east and west. That gets rid of a lot of these issues.
To do that efficiently, the US will need a new interconnected high voltage grid. Princeton found it would take nearly $320 billion in investments in the next 10 years, almost as much as investments in solar and wind plants themselves. Congress is working on an infrastructure bill that contains some funding, but really only a fraction of what's needed.
I'm optimistic about our ability to do it because we have done it before. I am nervous about the execution between legislation, regulation, and industry
I mean, if the government actually wants it done, it will happen, but who knows if they really care that much.
follow through.
The US is currently on track to have 42% of our energy come from renewables by 2050.
Only 42%?
current
That's really low, actually.
Proposals turn into real policy, we could be closer to 80%.
That'd be awesome.
But just making green
So honestly, we should go ahead with this, but we should also go ahead with just building way more nuclear power plants. But yeah, both solutions are valid, and we should actually use both of them. Build more transmission lines, build more nuclear, build more solar, and build more wind farms. All three work really well, so we should use it. We should use what we have, you know.
greener electricity isn't enough. We have to be able to move it.
Transmission's important for the clean energy future. We're just not going to decarbonize without it.
And there was a breakthrough in fusion technology in Korea, I think. They just made a breakthrough in nuclear fusion. So hopefully we get somewhere along that path as well. And let's check out the comments. Renewable energy is now cheaper than most fossil fuel energy. The fossil fuel industry is doing everything they can to slow down renewable energy distribution and adoption so they don't lose out on their investments. As a Lithuanian, I hope you guys managed to overcome any issues that impede the progress for renewable green energy. Here in Lithuania, we already made huge progress in green energy before the whole Paris conference, and we are now on track to meet all of our EU goals by 2030 and 2050. But you know which countries are really good at renewable energy? I think these countries are majority renewable energy, and it's not European countries. It's actually like Costa Rica, I think. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Costa Rica is very renewable. I think Panama might be as well, and like Nicaragua. Yeah, but yeah, I know Costa Rica is pretty much almost 100% renewable, which is amazing. Like, yeah, it's awesome. I think Bhutan is also one of the countries as well, but they don't really use much energy in the first place. But yeah, I think they don't produce any pollution pretty much. Bhutan. Does this also take into account localized generation, rooftop solar, microgrids, and so on? Would DC make for more efficient transmission? There's a third point that's regarding, which is consumption reduction. Excellent presentation. I wish all Americans could see this, understand it, and have the will to take appropriate action. It is so sad that we are so divided and so poorly trained to think critically to make informed decisions that are in the best interest of all of us. Honestly, you must construct additional pylons. Sometimes it feels like America's got the roads, power, and hydro infrastructure of a former Soviet state. Fun fact, Burlington, Vermont became the first US city to run on 100% renewable energy in 2014. That's awesome. Still possible, yeah. Canadian living north of Vermont there. The reason you import energy from Quebec is that our energy is super cheap and only comes from renewables as we rely on hydro energy at 100%. We have been producing extra power for years already and sell extra to the US ever since. Thanks, neighbor. Hahaha. While I live in Asia, induction cooktop is so common and so good, it makes me feel like I'm living in the future. It's 1,000 times better than traditional gas stove or electric stove. Yeah. If we need a greener future, most politicians need to be replaced. US should just look up north for a great model. Quebec is the #1 standard when it comes to efficient and stable grid. Love how one of the cleanest sources of energy, nuclear, is not considered green, while solar power, which requires lots of resources in order to produce solar panels, and the waste these panels produce at the EOL is considered green. No, nuclear should be considered green, but regardless if it is or not, we should use it anyway. Honestly, it's very safe, and it's also very low polluted. It's very low polluting. Yeah, it doesn't produce much, so it doesn't pollute much, so we should use it anyway, regardless if it's green or not. We should use it. There is a lot of focus on renewable energy, but nuclear is also carbon free. Oh yeah, nuclear is renewable, but it's not green, I guess. I think. So we should be using nuclear, definitely. I feel like there was a missed opportunity around talking about how nuclear fits into this. Better yet, I would love a video on why there is such a focus on wind and solar as clean energy, and nuclear isn't often considered. Because wind and solar are trendy and have developed a powerful lobby. Maybe that's just a cynical take. Every time I watch one of these videos, the comments are full of, "What about nuclear?" and people pointing out that wind, solar, and hydro aren't as impact-free as they're made out to be. But these questions always seem to be ignored by the policymakers and media giants. If there is an argument against focusing our energy investments in nuclear that isn't driven by unfounded Cold War era hysteria, I'd like to hear it. As someone who's about to enter the nuclear industry from uni, I can say that the average person is friendly towards nuclear. Practically no one I've ever met has been hostile towards it, perhaps out of politeness. The difference is purely image. Wind/solar have common knowledge and institutional support and lobbying to back it up, while nuclear has an uphill battle to even be talked about in circles and spaces that actually have any impact on public policy. What I find even more surprising is that your neighbor France is pro-nuclear. They don't seem to be having any problems. Could you explain why? Well, yeah, Germany's kind of forcing France to be less nuclear, which just sucks, because Germany's very anti-nuclear, which, yeah, not good. Anyway, we need to change to electric cars. Hear me out. Make cities actually traversable without cars. Yeah, really. And electric cars as well. Electric cars and make cities walkable, too, yeah. And better public transportation. Car enthusiasts would like to know your location. Well, real car enthusiasts would actually benefit from more walkable cities, because the people who actually want to drive can drive in these less dense areas. So if there's less cars on the road, people who want to drive will have a better driving experience, which is better for them. Anyway, this was an interesting video, and if you enjoyed my reaction, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Really helps out. Thanks for watching. Bye.